grief. Grief is the emotion that is a very powerful emotion. It is when you've experienced a loss, particularly a loss that you could never regain. You'll have that experience. And death, of course, is the principal one that this really hits home to people. When a loved one that they're close to dies, they're gone. They're not coming back. You're not going to see them in this life any longer. And having said this now, we're going to be focusing upon grief from the Christian perspective, as opposed to looking at grief from the non-Christian perspective. There's far more non-Christians that face grief than there are Christians who face grief, because there's not that many of us who are true believers. And non-Christians have nothing to hold on to. When somebody dies, they lose somebody, whether it's a friend, a spouse, a child, a parent, grandparents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, and so on. When you lose somebody and is not a Christian, you're dealing with this strictly on the human level. And it is overwhelming in many cases to those individuals. They never fully recover from that. But looking at it from the Christian perspective, and that's what we're going to be doing, looking at this, the balance of this and the Christian perspective. We know as believers that ultimately we're going to meet other believers in heaven. Now, we may have somebody that dies who is not a believer. That's going to be tough. And in my experience as a pastor, I've had family members who had a loved one who died, not a Christian, made no profession of faith, wanted nothing to do with the things of God. And then, after the funeral, they gathered among themselves and they talked, trying to find some straw, something to grasp to that maybe possibly at some point that they didn't know about, he came to faith. And that's pretty much where they had to leave it, because they knew of no testimony. And one of them said, well, he went to church 25 years ago on one occasion that I know of, but he only went the one time. And of course, in 25 years, if he'd come to faith in that time, there would have been obvious spiritual growth in that individual's life. And you would have seen some transition. And that just didn't exist. And so that is hard for Christians. Very hard for Christians. It is hard for us when a person who is a Christian dies, and we are a Christian, and we know we're going to see them again. We know that we're going to see them in eternity, in absolute perfection. They'll be in perfect, and we'll be perfect, and it's going to be a perfect environment for a perfect eternity. We're going to enjoy all of that, and it's going to be wonderful beyond all ability to even begin to remotely comprehend the wonders of all that. To enjoy that. It's amazing. But we need to understand that grief is a process that we need to work through. And so we're going to be looking at this. Loss is where we left off last time when we met, is bound to come in this fallen world, and grief with it. Absolutely. Grief is not an emotion to be avoided, but one to acknowledge, and walk through. When somebody dies that is close to you, you're a Christian, the person who died is a Christian. But now you're not going to see that person for the rest of your earthly existence. They're gone. They're with the Lord. And you deal with a whole series of emotions that accompany the grief of the loss. You're not going to see him again in this life. What am I going to do? They filled a part of my heart, and that part is empty now. There's a fear that I might forget them as time goes on. And so they have a tendency to want to hang on to grief. Depending upon how the person passed, there may be a sense, a feeling of anger, and these are normal emotions. In fact, all the emotions that you're capable of experiencing as a Christian with the loss of a loved one, you will experience to varying degrees. And what you need to realize is the adjusting process of grief is initially it hits you. And it's like, did it really happen? And of course, you are forced to realize, yes, it did. They died. Wow. It hurts. It's hard. I miss them. And all these things go on. But looking at it from the biblical position that yourself as a Christian and the deceased as a Christian, you're going to see them again. This is just a brief vacation from their not being with us at that point. But you begin to take control of your life and begin to adjust to them not being there any longer. And many people feel guilt. Well, I should have had a closer relationship. I should have been there more with them and for them. That's also a part of the grief experience. And most everybody will feel that to some degree or another. But you do overcome those things, all by the grace of God. And you will eventually reach that point. On average, it takes about a year or a little more before you begin to realize, hey, life can go on with them not being here. I can enjoy this life. I can be a productive person in this life, even though they were very close to me and I miss them tremendously. And I never have a day that I don't even think about them. Well, you think about them frequently. But the pain dissipates. And you begin to look at it from an objective point of view, their departure. And at that point, you begin to adjust yourself to the fact that they're not here. But God's grace enables you to embrace that they're not here. And it's a wonderful experience to sense God's grace in all of this. Yeah, you got to walk through this. If you try to avoid it and pretend like it didn't happen, you only lengthen and deepen the grief. And it reaches a point it can be almost debilitating in some people. And you got to get beyond that. So we got to realize from the biblical position the great truths that we know. But one, to acknowledge and to walk through these things, that's a very important thing. Don't avoid them. Death is often the impetus for grief, but we can grieve over loss of any kind. That may include loss of a dream, loss of a relationship, loss of health, a pet's death, or even the sale of a childhood home. I was born in that home, and I grew up there. And Mom and Dad lived there, and now they're gone. There's nobody to live there. But I don't want it sold. I want to keep it. You know, things of that nature. All of this is a part of the grieving process, and you have to learn to handle each of these situations in a God-honoring way. Sometimes grief feels more private when it is related to things like infertility, miscarriage, abortion, betrayal by a spouse, or even our own sinfulness. All of these things can certainly change the dynamic and the way we think and the way we're going to function and even the speed with which we begin to recover from the grief process that we're experiencing. The things over which we grieve may be hard to express to others, but often sharing our losses and allowing someone else to mourn with us is a path through the pain. Romans 12:15. Our church family is a family. Very few Christians seem to realize this today. We think of this just being more like a social club. You join it, you're there for a while, then you're not there any longer, gone, whatever. But we really do need to think in terms of our church family. Our earthly family, our natural earthly family. Most everyone is going to have members that never come to faith in Christ. Some do, but in some cases many don't. And when somebody dies, you need people around you of like precious faith, your spiritual family. Remember this. Our spiritual relationship with God is permanent. Likewise, our relationship with every believer, every true believer, from the day of the first believer to the day of the last believer, we're all going to be one great family together. We will know them, they will know us. There'll be no strangers in the eternal state. We're going to enjoy this relationship. But here and now, in the local congregation, where the fellowship of believers gather, we need to love each other. We need to have a close relationship with each other. Not just somebody that we see on Sundays, on occasions, and that's it. But a connection. And it's a two-way street. Not a one-way street. Two people in the church, we come together as a church family to love each other, care for each other, encourage one another, support one another, help one another, be of assistance whenever, wherever, and how God gives us the opportunity to be a tool in His hand to encourage those who are discouraged, to enable those who are in grief to share their grief and understanding. Not to put them down, but to let them know that you feel this too, because we really all do. Very important to keep these things in mind. All right? The family of God is vital in our lives and a key means by which God's ministers to us and uses us to minister to others. Of course, the first place we should take our grief is directly to God, both in prayer and in studying His Word. God can use grief to help us know Him more, both as we receive His comfort and as our grief prompts us to more fully appreciate the gift of life and more deeply understand the reality of sin's effects on our world. Grief can connect us to the heart of God. It certainly can. And in my own experience, I was an only child. And my parents didn't just only want one child, they wanted a whole family of children. But they got me, and that was it. And I had no brothers, no sisters, and mom and dad. And when mom and dad, God called them from this life, both in the same year, and even called the family dog in that year too. All of a sudden, I was alone at 22 years of age in the world. I had my relationship with God. I had my relationship with my church family and believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. And it is amazing how God brought those things together in my life. That was the encouragement that I needed, the support that I needed, the help that I needed in practical ways as well as in spiritual ways. And as such, I came through the grieving process very quickly because, well, both my parents were Christians, so I knew where they were at, and I'm a Christian, so I knew where I was going to be at. We're going to meet again. And this is just a temporary pause in our relationship. But it's amazing what God can do. But not everybody functions that way. They have a tendency to grieve, they withdraw from people instead of being with people and sharing with people. It's an important dynamic in which that we need to do. Grief can connect us to the heart of God. It certainly can. And it's just amazing how God prepared me for it, how God took care of me. Just was amazing. When my father was killed, when he was crossing the street, he was struck by a car, was killed. Death was instant for him, according to the reports that I received. And I was away at college in Tennessee, and I worked part-time and went to school and a whole thing. And I came back to that afternoon. After I finished my job and finished my classes, I came back to my dorm room. And there, sitting in the dorm room with my roommate, yeah, one of the leaders of the school was sitting there. And everybody, he and my roommate looked at me. And I knew something was up. But here's how God prepared me. Earlier in the day, the thought went through my mind, what if Dad dies? And as that thought went through my mind, I sensed a preparation, a comforting feeling is about as best as I can describe it. And when I came in, and the dean of men, he announced to me that he got a phone call from dear friends of our family, letting me know that my father had died in this auto pedestrian accident. I was not shocked. I didn't feel shocked. In fact, I shared with them that the thought that I had had. This is what God does for the believer. He prepares us for things. And so I wasn't stunned. And so, of course, I prepared to go. It was late in the day, but there's no point in driving all night in the dark, so I waited the morning's light to leave. And I did, because there's nothing to go to at home, not even the dog. The dog had died the month before. And it's just interesting how God works these things out. And step by step, all the pieces came together. God is good. God is faithful. God is a marvelous and wonderful God. He helps, He encourages, He challenges. Okay? Psalm 34 and verse 18 says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Sometimes situations and circumstances are such with people that it is a crushing blow. But God is always there, and there's always grace and strength that God brings in situations like that. Yeah, crushed spirit. God understands our grief. Did you know that He is the one who perfectly understands your grief, your fear, your sorrow, your pain? He perfectly understands it. He understands it as feeling it as you feel it. Think about that. Our great God feels what we feel as His children. He feels that. He knows that. Okay? He understands our grief and offers to be with us and to comfort us with promises from His Word and with the peace that passes all understanding. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. I've experienced that peace on any number of occasions in my life. You can't explain it. It's impossible to communicate it to somebody else, the peace that you should not have, but you do have. You can't explain it. It's what God does. You know it, and you know that God knows it because He's the one that has enabled that. Peace. And I remember the first night at home that the house was totally empty. I didn't have any problem at all going through the house. I didn't have any problem at all going to bed. I had a very good night's rest. And I woke up the next morning ready to deal with all the things I had to deal with in relationship to my father's passing. But God is gracious to all of us. We who believe, you're not alone. He's always with you. Yeah. Peace that passes all understanding. Can't explain it, literally. He also includes examples in His Word of godly people who suffered grief. In our upcoming study that follows our study here on biblical Christian ethics, our study of Job, all the things that he lost, but he still didn't completely fall apart. God permitted certain things in his life. And sometimes we're going to learn in the study of Job the things that seem to be unexplainable. Why did God let that happen to us? Unexplainable. Oh, wow. And yet, He is there. And He can take care of us in those situations that are totally unexplainable. Yeah. He also included examples in His Word of godly people who suffered grief, like Job, for example. Peter felt grief when Jesus asked him 3 times, "Do you love me more than these?" The context of this is Peter had denied the Lord 3 times within a 1 hour time. He denied Him. I don't know Him. I don't know who He is. I'm not His disciple. And Jesus comes to him after His resurrection to restore Peter. And Peter's having a hard time with that. And when He addresses Peter, in the Greek language, there is different words, 4 to be exact, for the word love. 3 of those 4 words actually occur in the Bible. But in the English language, we only have 1 word for love, and you have to rely on the context of what that 1 word love means in that given context in the English. But the Greek of the New Testament, you have to understand the different words that were used, and when you understand those words, you know what they each mean. And basically the conversation went like this. Jesus asked 3 times, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "I love you," this first time. "I love you," the second time. "I love you," the third time. And we think, boy, this is a lot of redundancy. In the English language it is. But in the Greek language it's not, because they use different words. And the words that were exchanged was the word for friend, the word for the type of love that is the love of God, that was used. And these 2 words were batted back and forth. And Peter never did say, "I love you," with the same word that Jesus used with him, the love of God, the supreme form of love, agape, agapao. He never used those words. He was afraid to. But Jesus used the words. And then when Jesus concluded, He used the very word that Peter used, that of a friend. "I love you as a friend." And that really woke up Peter. Yeah, that woke him up. It got him back on the right track. But these are things that he was grieved. That's why he couldn't answer the Lord with the same response that He gave. On other occasions, he was very quick that anything that God said, Jesus said, he immediately responded to it and answered it. In many cases correctly, on some cases incorrectly, but nevertheless, it was a quick response. And now it's a well thought out response that he's getting and giving. Yeah. And he grieved at the memory of how he had betrayed his best friend in Luke chapter 22, verses 61, 62. Yeah. He thought that my relationship with him can never be exactly the same. His relationship was not exactly the same as it was before, because he was in spiritual immaturity with many of the answers that he would give to Jesus on different occasions. Correct answers on many of the occasions, but not the spiritual maturity that he really needed. But then, in the end, he was sold out without question to Jesus. Totally and completely.